Hi fam, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome. My name is Akbeze and I'm a Christian content creator based in Lagos, Nigeria. Back with another episode of my Kingdom Wives / Women of Faith series in which we are studying the women of faith in the Bible and learning from their stories. Last week we were studying Mary, and part of our study was the reading in Matthew 1, which outlines the ancestor of Jesus. Matthew chapter 1 verse 3 outlines that Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. So this is the first woman that is mentioned in the ancestors of Jesus, and we are deep diving into her study in Genesis chapter 38. So it says that about this time, Judah left home and moved to Adullam, where he stayed with a man named Hira. There he saw a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, and he married her. At this point, I have to stop because about this time, you're wondering like, what's going on? This story just kind of breaks into the story of Jacob and his descendants, in particular Joseph, and the incident where he was sold into slavery by his brothers. It was actually Judah's idea to sell him into slavery instead of killing him. And then, it kind of just breaks off into this story, and then from there it goes back to Joseph's story. So I just thought it was very interesting. Bearing in mind that, in fact, this week in my faith series, we are studying about Abraham, and we see the call for, Abraham and his people to leave their homeland and go into the promised land. And the promised land was essentially Canaan because we saw in the study of Noah. You need to be following this channel because it's all connected. I really keep seeing this invisible thread just running through. But we learned in the study of Noah that, Noah had cursed Canaan, who was the son of Ham, and said that Shem would be the one who would be blessed. And, then we see that part of this blessing is for them to rule over the Canaanites. So it's interesting to me already at this point that I'm seeing that at first, Judah marries a Canaanite woman, and when he slept with her, she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and he named the boy Er. Then she became pregnant again and gave birth to another son, and she named him Onan. And when she gave birth to a third son, she named him Shelah. At the time of Shelah's birth, they were living at Kezib. In the course of time, Judah arranged for his firstborn son, Er, to marry a young woman named Tamar. Now, at this point, I'm a bit intrigued because we're not told her tribe, but I suspect she's a Canaanite because they are in that region anyways. And so already I'm thinking that so interesting that a Canaanite woman is included in the genealogy of Jesus, even though these people are apparently cursed. And it just reminds me of this thing that I used to say, that like, as a woman of faith, like, no one can curse who God has blessed. Like, your whole people can be cursed, but if God decides you're gonna be blessed, you're gonna be blessed. But anyways, let's keep reading. It says that, but Er was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Er's brother Onan, go and marry Tamar, as our law requires of the brother of a man who has died. You must produce an heir for your brother. But Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground, and this prevented her from having a child who would belong to his brother. But the Lord considered it evil, and that is really so evil. Like, you were happy to have sex with this woman, but you did not want to procreate or give her an heir. Not only would that heir, honor your brother's life or whatever and do what the law required, but that heir would take care of her when she was older, because, as a woman in those times, you're extremely vulnerable and you either depend on your father or your husband or your son to take care of you. So anyways, so wicked of him, but God, being a God who sees us, hears us, looks after us, the Lord considered it evil for Onan to deny a child to his dead brother, so the Lord took Onan's life too. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, go back to your parents' home and remain a widow until my son Shelah is old enough to marry you. But Judah didn't really intend to do this because he was afraid Shelah would also die, like his two brothers. So Tamar went back to live in her father's home. At this point, I have to remind us about the theme and, the lesson that we learn about kingdom wives from 1 Peter 3. And in particular where it talks about the unfading beauty of a quiet and gentle spirit, because at this point if you can imagine, Tamar could have been arguing with him like, oh no, let me just wait, I don't mind waiting around here, like why should I go back to my father's house, blah 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 blah. But we don't hear a word from her. She quietly just goes along with his plan and goes back to her father's home. And so it tells us that some years later, Judah's wife died, and after the time of mourning was over, Judah and his friend Hira the Adullamite went up to Timnah to supervise the shearing of the sheep. Someone told Tamar, which I just thought to myself, God does send helpers our way. Like we saw how with Mary, like an angel appeared to her and gave her a message. And here we are seeing how someone, the person is not named, someone told Tamar that, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. Tamar was aware that Shelah had grown up, but no arrangements had been made for her to come and marry him. So she changed out of her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Then she sat beside the road at the entrance to the village of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. Judah noticed her and thought she was a prostitute since she had covered her face. So he stopped and propositioned her. Let me have sex with you, he said, not realizing that she was his own daughter-in-law. How much will you pay me to have sex with me? Tamar asked. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, Judah promised. But what will you give me to guarantee that you will send the goat, she asked. I just thought to myself, girl, you learned your lesson. Because the first time when he sent her away, she quietly went, did not take any kind of guarantee, blindly just followed, and she was about to be played. But now she realized, strategy, let me get something, let me get a guarantee. So Judah asked her, what kind of guarantee do you want? And she answered, leave me your identification seal and its cord and the walking stick you are carrying. So Judah gave them to her. Then he had intercourse with her and she became pregnant. Afterwards, she went back home, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothing as usual. And at this point, I must admit that I am seeing so much wisdom and tact in her. And such wisdom and tact, I believe, can only come from God. But let's keep reading. So it says, later, Judah asked his friend Hira the Adullamite to take the young goat to the woman and to pick up the things he had given her as his guarantee. But Hira couldn't find her, so he asked the men who were living there, where can I find the shrine prostitute who was sitting beside the road at the entrance to Enaim? And they replied, we've never had a shrine prostitute here. So Hira returned to Judah and told him, I couldn't find her anywhere, and the men of the village claimed that they've never had a shrine prostitute there. Then let her keep the things I gave her, Judah said. I sent the young goat as we agreed, and you couldn't find her. Would be the laughingstock of the village if we went back to look for her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has acted like a prostitute, and now because of this, she's pregnant. Please look at Judah's response. Bring her out and let her be burned, he demanded. But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent this message to her father-in-law. The man who owns these things made me pregnant. Look closely. Whose seal and cord and walking stick are these? Judah recognized them immediately and said, she is more righteous than I am, because I didn't arrange for her to marry my son Shelah. And Judah never slept with Tamar again. When the time came for Tamar to give birth, it was discovered that she was carrying twins. When I think of Tamar's story, I think of one line, like it can only be God. Because, first of all, what are the odds that someone tells her that her father-in-law was about to be passing through the area? She positions herself, he takes interest in her, he sleeps with her, and she becomes pregnant. And presumably they only have sex once. She becomes pregnant, and when it's time for her to give birth, it is not only one child she gives birth to, she gives birth to two. And it tells us that Judah never went into her again. And I'm like, God is such a redeemer. Like, God is so merciful. And it does seem like very tactful, like what she did. But I believe that that wisdom came from God. Like, it could only be God, because so far we see that, for the most part, we see that she's just very cooperative and just goes with the flow. Whatever they're telling her to do, she's doing. Marry this one, sleep with this one, she's sleeping. Do this, she's doing. Wait for me, she's waiting. But then at a point, something changes in her, and I believe that that is the wisdom of God. That is the urge that could have come from God, and just God's plan playing itself out. Because when I think back to the list of the ancestors that are given in Matthew, why was it not Shua? Why was it not the children from Shua? Because Shelah was still alive at that point. You know, why didn't God decide to use Shelah as the ancestor of Jesus? Why was it Perez? Why was it Tamar's son? And, you know, even in the way that Perez was born, we read on and it says that while she was in labor, one of the babies reached out his hand. The midwife grabbed it and tied a scarlet string around the child's wrist, announcing this one came out first. But then he pulled back his hand and out came his brother. What? The midwife exclaimed. How did you break out first? So he was named Perez. Then the baby with the scarlet string on his wrist was born and he was named Zerah. It can only be God. Is who told that baby to put back his hand and then Perez to come out? It is God that does all these things. And so, you know, what I learned from her as a kingdom wife and as a woman of faith, number one is that God does take care of his own. Even going back to her husband's, you know, imagine being married to a wicked, evil man. So it does tell us that it was an arranged marriage. Judah arranged for his firstborn son to marry this woman, and he was a wicked man. So imagine you're in an arranged marriage and it's a wicked man that you've been arranged to marry, and you're just like, what is my life? But God comes through, kills the guy, wipes him off. She doesn't even have to do or say anything. And then, you know, the next son that is assigned for you to marry refuses to give you a child, and God notices that evil again and vindicates you, kills the guy, and at this point you're still quiet, not saying, not doing anything. And the last son that you're meant to marry, you're played and you're sent away to your father's home in mourning clothes. For how long? Like, it even tells us that this boy grew up and she was still in mourning clothes. And even after pretending to be a prostitute, she went back and changed it to her mourning clothes. And I'm like, look at the life that you were just subjected to, but God changed your story. As a woman of faith, as a kingdom wife, you know that your story is in God's hands. It's not in your husband's hands. And so you live without fear. You live with faith. You live by his wisdom. You live by his word. I thought it was very interesting how they narrated this role of prostitution that she played, because I feel like, you know, God was making it very clear to us that she was a righteous woman. She was not a prostitute, because, you know, even when she went to pretend like she was a prostitute, it says afterwards she went back home, took off her veil, put on her widow's clothing as usual. That as usual lets me know that this is the life she was living. She was living the widow's life. She was not living the prostitute's life. And then when Hira went back to look for her, he couldn't find her. And when he asked the people around, they said, we have never had a shrine prostitute here. And that to me just reinforced that, as Judah said, you know, she is more righteous than I am. She is more righteous than a lot of us are. And it made me see that, you know, God will count us as righteous, even if there is like some corner involved. I don't even know how to explain it. I don't want to glorify sin or even such kind of behavior. But just, you know, God counts it all together, and you will be counted as righteous so long as you are in line with God's will and God's path. But yeah, I feel like it's pretty short and straightforward, Tamar's story, and I pray you were blessed by her story. So next week, we'll be studying the next female ancestor of Jesus, and that is Rahab, which is so interesting because this was a real life prostitute, Rahab the prostitute. Her story is fascinating because the faith journey is not as narrow as you think or as straight as you think. Like, there may be twists and turns, but you'll be counted as righteous. So anyways, Rahab's story is contained in Hebrews 11 verse 31, Joshua 2, Joshua 6 from verse 22 to 25, and Matthew 1:5. So I'll see you next week. I love you, and never forget, Jesus loves you the most. Bye fam.